Hello, everyone. I'm Matt Williamson. How you doing? As we're recording this, the news just blew up on my phone 10 minutes ago or so that Brandon Ayuk has officially requested a trade. I feel like that's the elephant in the room for you guys. You would probably want to talk about that to some degree. My thoughts really haven't changed. So you've heard all this before, but I did want to reiterate it because it's probably the biggest story right now. And it really seems, and I do believe this, that if he were to get traded, it would likely be to Washington or the Steelers. I mean, I think those are the teams that are highly interested. Maybe there's a team out there I'm not thinking of. I mean, the Chargers. I mean, they need receivers. There's a lot of teams could use them, but you got to have cap space, and it's got to make sense on your timeline, etc. Now, I told you this before. My favorite scenario would be Ayuk goes to Washington, and then you put a strong effort in to go get McLaurin. And McLaurin's still a great player. And again, I'm not going to dig real deep into these because I got some other stuff I want to talk about with George Pickens. But if I'm Washington, by the time Washington's good, I don't know McLaurin will still be good. So you buy a lot of time, you get a little better. Ayuk is better than McLaurin, but McLaurin's a great player. But for the Steelers timeline, McLaurin would make a ton of sense. And you got the cap space, and he's a very manageable cap hit right now. I don't know if he'd be on the block if they were adding Ayuk. I tend to think you could get him if they are. As for Ayuk to the Steelers, I've said 1,000 times, next year's first round pick is not on the table for me in any way, shape, or form. However, much like the Minka deal, sometimes there are players that just don't become available very often that is exactly what you need. I could maybe be convinced. I could maybe be convinced for Ayuk. He's that good. He's been great every step of the way, but last year he was truly one of the best 5 or 6 receivers in the whole league, especially against press man coverage, but he is the total package. And the big reason why I don't want to trade the first, amongst other things, are supposed to be a really good defensive tackle draft. I think that could be very much in play, but more so, you don't have a quarterback under contract. But because you have so much cap space, you do have other avenues to go get a quarterback or keep one of these guys or whatever. And man, if you could drop a quarterback into an Ayuk, Pickens, and this offensive line situation, I mean, now you're really talking. I don't think the Niners will trade him when it's all said and done, but these things can get ugly, and we'll see. But those are my quick thoughts on that. BetOnline's your number one source for all your summer sports this season, from Major League Baseball, golf, and so many more. All the latest stats, news, and scores available to follow your favorite teams. Get the latest odds and lines, including the latest team matchups, player props, and odds on just about every sport out there. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Bet online, where the game starts. One of my favorite fantasy analysts out there is Rich Rebar. And he put out his wide receiver tiers yesterday or the day before or whatever. And I did my wide receiver ranks recently for fantasy. If you don't play fantasy, you'll still get the gist of this, by the way. There's so much overlap. And I thought I was incredibly high on Pickens as the wide receiver 19 in fantasy. Now, wide receiver is a stacked group, obviously. But I had him over names like Devontae Smith, Michael Pittman, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel. I'm like, wow, I'm pretty rich on Pickens. Well, Rich Rebar has him as wide receiver 12. So I had to go through this write-up and talk to you guys about it, because a big thing he does is he compares Pickens to the 3 top dudes that were drafted that year. Wilson with the Jets, London with the Falcons, Olave with the Saints. All the same age. All 3 of those guys are going extremely high in fantasy, as you can imagine. But there's 3 key stats he kind of goes off of. But just look at this. I mean, yards per route run, Olave comes in at 2.07. Pickens is at 2.06. London at 1.89. Wilson at 1.55. Now, Wilson's quarterback play, as the case with London's, was horrendous, but Pickens wasn't catching balls from, Jim Kelly, Brett Favre either, and neither was Olave. Target percentage per route run, Pickens was the lowest at 20.2, and we think that's going to spike compared to 22.7 for London, 24.9 for Wilson, 25.5 to Olave. And then they track what percentage of inaccurate passes were on these players' targets. So Olave's was only 13%. When they threw the ball his way, 13% of them were deemed inaccurate. London's was at 13.6. Wilson, despite those ridiculous quarterbacks, were 16.7. And Pickens is all the way up at 17.1. And the logic here is you're probably going to get your targets per route up with Johnson out of the mix. You got to think your inaccurate percentage goes down. And his production on his own spiked quite a bit in year 2, obviously. I think his usage is going to be expanded. I think you're going to see more slants and layup routes and comebacks and outs. And how about this? Pickens ran 188 routes last season with Deontay off the field. He was targeted on about 24% of those routes, accounting for 27.6 of the targets and averaging 2.97 yards per route run. That's a gigantic number. 3 yards per route run is Tyreek. It's actually Ayuk. Those were the league leaders. If you're flirting with 3 yards every time you run a route, that is bonkers. So with the number, in the 347 routes he ran with Johnson on the field, he was targeted 17.5% of those routes, again, compared to 23.9. Accounting for 20.5% of the team's targets compared to 27.6, and only averaged 1.68 yards per route run compared to 2.94. So he missed 4 games entirely last year, Johnson. That was week 2. He got 34.5% of the targets, 127 yards and touchdown. Week 3, he had 22.2% of the targets, 75 yards that game. Week 4 wasn't great. 25.9% of the targets for only 25 yards. And in week 5, he got just under 33% of the targets, 130 yards and a touchdown. But for the fantasy world, for those 4 weeks, he's an easy wide receiver 1. And they were all with Kenny Pickett. We have to think that the quarterback position is going to spike a little bit. Wilson had the 7th best inaccurate throw rate to wide receivers. His was only at 10.1% compared to Pickett, who was at 18.3%. Coincidentally, side note, Fields was at 15.1. He was right in between. So all those things make you think this is not insane stuff to say Pickens could be one of the top 11 or 12 wide receivers in a really, really deep, awesome group of wide receivers in fantasy, but in the real world as well. Obviously, fantasy correlates to, production. And the other thing that Rich doesn't even mention in here that much, and I bring it up all the time, the Steelers are probably almost certainly going to throw more touchdown passes next year. Wilson throws the ball in the end zone. He threw 26 touchdowns last year. The days of throwing a touchdown pass ratio of less than 1 per game, which is insane that we become accustomed to, I think is long gone. Or not long gone, but hopefully gone. So a lot of you think I'm harsh on Pickens, and I think he has a lot of work to do. Fantasy aside, I do not think he is a wide receiver 1 yet, but I am also very strict on throwing that term around. I'm not sure DJ Moore is a wide receiver 1. Ayuk is, by the way. But there just aren't a ton of them on the planet. There's 10, 11, 12 of them, something like that. Garrett Wilson is that we talked about. London and Olave are getting there, and I think are a little ahead of Pickens on that regard. But all this stuff lines up for an awful lot of production, I guess, is the bottom line. So, all right, I'm curious what you guys think of Ayuk. What would you actually pay for him? Don't tell me, bring Ayuk to Pittsburgh. No matter what. The Steelers can afford him. I mean, he's going to get a big contract. He's going to get a Amon-Ra St. Brown or better contract if he were to get traded. $30 million, maybe a little more. A lot of it guaranteed. Then it makes it sticky. You know, can you bring Pickens back when his time's up? Cross that bridge when you come to it, maybe. And if I'm the Niners, I really want a first-round pick. I mean, yeah, you could throw in Herbig or Dan Moore or something like that because their line needs it. But still, I mean, that's not going to carry a whole lot of weight in a Brandon Ayuk trade. So, again, I like the McLaurin route. I mean, that to me is a third-round pick, third and a fifth, something like that for McLaurin. And it wouldn't be too bad. All right, take care.